Participatory design and architecture. We hear more and more often about it and it sounds promising, but not always clear. When should we engage people in our design process? So let's have a closer look at architecture design process stages and think, when should we consider participation sessions there? I have to warn you that in real life it doesn't always go in straight line as in theory, so sometimes you might end up with something like this. I was lucky enough to get my first architecture work experience right after my bachelor graduation. On that project I was all by my own, from the very first sketches to the owners finally moved into the house. You might ask, what a crazy person will let a fresh graduate without experience to do so? Well, my father did. Actually, it was his dream for a really long time, but thanks God we couldn't afford it earlier. And yes, of course, I did some mistakes as well as my clients did. But in general, everybody happy with the result, and it even became a main photoshoot location for my sister's blog. I know for some of you who live in Western countries it looks like huge house worth millions, but it's definitely not the case in Ukraine, where I'm from. Now going back to why we are here, and let's talk about the project process and participation. You wouldn't believe me, but again I'm going to say that a good project starts with the research, no matter if it's architecture, urban design or furniture. The length of this period will depend on your experience and project complexity. There is a big difference between your first house and fifth one. If you did residential projects before and then suddenly you've got a museum, there is no architect equally good in all types of buildings and locations and conditions. With every new challenge you will start research again. Check the history of this type of buildings, look for the references, try to understand the logic behind the functions, flows, materials, dimensions, and what are the special needs for this particular case, and so on and so forth. In some cases you will get a detailed brief up front. Sometimes when, for example, you work on housing directly with people who will live there, you will make a project brief together with them, and already you can call it as a start of partnership, which is participation. And in big housing projects you might start spreading the word to find, for example, future residents. I have to say that I'm actually not sure how it could go with public buildings, because I'm more into housing if we talk about architecture. Then the feasibility study, and so here if you aim for the participatory design you will move back and forth before you will get clear picture of what actually needed and possible, and agree on all these positioning principles and scenarios. And we are not talking about competitions here, because it's completely different story. If you have multiple stakeholders, you will do all kind of World Cafe collective brainstorms to find common ground, so everybody agree on main principles. Like everyone agrees on collective rooftop, as it happened in Stripe S project. By the way, it is a big rental property, and even though they were looking for the future tenants to participate in design. If it's a one-family house, like I conducted several times, get ready to listen a lot and try to understand what kind of life flow they have and values. With one of my clients, I used to spend hours on her kitchen. She would tell me stories of their life, describing me their habits and interests. Meanwhile, she was cooking amazing pancakes. In the first project, my participatory mistake was that I spoke mainly with my father, because my mom didn't much interest in architecture for quite a lot of time. She was mainly in the gardening, but it led to some troubles and quite big fights. Well, we will come back to it in administration phase stage. In here, I want to make some remark and show you one drawing that my former colleague Tom shared with me. Why is it important to get all this information on early stages and agree on key points? Because the earlier you do it, the fewer financial consequences you will get in the future. And here comes my father's mistake. The moment I grew up to the point I could tell him, I told you so. Since back then I didn't have any practice and things I learned in uni were not convincing enough for him to invest a bit more to waterproof the foundation. So just a few years later, the water came inside. And I guess there is no need to tell you that it was way more expensive to fix the issue than preventing it. Once again, the earlier you make a decision, the lower the cost. After feasibility study, we move to the concept stage. The moment when you first put all your ideas into paper, the moment when you think that every new idea is genius and everybody should adore it. For me, it's a very emotional and sensitive moment, and I find it quite hard sometimes to share with someone thought that it's just still abstract and not clear yet. How would you do the stage participative then? Apparently, if you give a room and tools to others to express their thoughts, you will get way more ideas. You don't need to convince them to adopt your idea. It's actually even fun. You will turn the process into a game with models in scale. Do you remember I told you that not many people can draw as good as you? Actually, once I got a floor plan from the client made in Excel. Seriously, it was an Excel table with equal cells that represented 1 square meters. That was crazy. But everybody expressed their thoughts in the way they could and with the tools they have. Yeah, in this case you might see kind of a shift of architecture role from the genius artist to the co-creator and moderator, but we will talk about it in some other video. On the concept stage, the ideas are still quite abstract and you will have numerous of options, but I beg you narrow them down as much as possible before you move to the next stage. In a participatory way, you can make expos and votes or use online platforms like Kialo for constructive discussions and perfectly move forward with only 1 or maximum 3 options. Otherwise, you will go nuts. Once we made a few dozen of options in schematic design, the next stage, and it was endless process that led even to some financial problems in the company I worked because client didn't see it as an extra work. As I already mentioned, the next stage is schematic design. By drawing your ideas a bit more precisely, you will check that your idea is cohesive from every perspective. Everything works together from every angle, floor, sections, 3D. Be ready to give up some of your initial ideas because quite often they simply don't work as soon as you put them in a drawing, and you will get even more options to solve it. That's why it's important to reduce options every time you move to the next detailed stage, because each stage you will get more and more options. It will grow exponentially. Participation on this stage can narrow down to collective reviews, and you might also ask for some consulting advice. Remember, I've told you previously in one of the videos that keeping the feedback loop is highly important to build and maintain trust with project stakeholders. Then we move to detailed design, hopefully with only 1 option. You can still make changes in this project, but it's getting more and more complicated and expensive. At this stage, you zoom into materials, all kind of joints between the surfaces, materials, elements. Now you will start counting every brick, even taking into account every joint between them. Zooming in on every tile, focus on the pattern allocation, and again you will get more options. This is the point when it's cool to have mock-ups. And actually from this moment you can have 2 different approaches. You either control and design every single detail, or you give a room to craftsmen and other experts to add their ideas. When I design the private house, I like to mix both of them, just because I don't like to dictate people in detail how exactly they should do their work. There is one interesting Dutch Indian design office, and the way